Welcome to the Think Different podcast, the Students' Podcast. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Think Different podcast. My first guest today is the CEO at Art of Smart Education, a pioneer of 5 Australian firsts in education, and a man with a mission to empower 1 million students. Thank you for being here, Rowan.
Thanks for having me, Ali.
Well, starting off, going to a selective school, I struggle with balancing academics with everything else in life. Coming from a selective school yourself, how did you deal with this?
Good question. So, context for listeners, I many years ago went to Porkham Hills High. Look, I think it's a challenge for everyone. One of the things that we actually work and support students with is just an idea called Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law says that work expands to fill available time. So the more time you give yourself to do something, the longer it'll take because procrastination kicks in. And so, as counterintuitive as it may be, the way that I balanced things was by not quitting activity. So I still continued throughout years 11 and 12 to work at a casual job. I worked Thursdays and half days, sort of Sundays or Saturdays. Mostly Sundays, I was, trying to pursue elite soccer. So I was training at least 3 to 4 days a week, playing all day on a Saturday. And that might seem a little over the top and crazy, but actually what it did was that it meant that I became incredibly efficient in doing two things. One, knowing that when I came home from school, I couldn't sit around and twiddle my thumbs and, check my phone or watch TV. Like I had a 2-hour window to get work done before I went to training. And so I, didn't have an option to procrastinate because if I didn't get the work done, I'd be in real trouble. So having the commitments in my life, like sport, like work, actually was a really powerful incentive and motivator for me to use the time that I had more effectively, instead of wasting time. That was the first critical thing that helped. The second thing was something called transition moments. We all have time in our lives where we're moving from one thing to another. So, we're sitting on a train going back, from school, we're standing in a line, and most of the time we pull out our phone, and we don't really use that time effectively. And so one of the things that I did a lot of was when I had these little moments of time, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, I was finding ways to actually utilize them rather than just switch off and procrastinate or do nothing. And so rather than downplaying the value of a transition moment, in my head going, it's only 20 minutes, what good am I going to be able to achieve? It was really a matter of identifying how I could use even the small moments so that I was still being highly effective. So they would be two strategies that definitely made a huge difference in my ability to, balance the academic rigors of a selective school and the expectations that come with that, but while also continuing to, work a casual job and play sport. I mean, a whole bunch of other stuff, but they're sort of two definite ones that were very helpful.
With everything that you did, how did you make sure that you weren't overworking yourself? And what's your opinion on students trying to overwork themselves for really short periods of gain?
So I suppose, when you're saying overwork, I guess I'd love to understand that a little bit more. What do you mean when you're saying overwork? Are we talking burnout here? Are we talking about work very hard for a short period of time with lots of commitments and then burn out?
We're talking about something unsustainable in the long run. Like say 2 weeks leading up to an exam, cram time starts, which is in the minds of pretty much every student. It's 2 weeks left. We got to start cramming. How would you think about that? Or would you recommend continual commitment, or would you still keep energy for final bursts? Stuff like that.
Good question. So look, there is no doubt that in the lead up to exams, assessments, really any important event in our lives, let's not just locate this purely in the school context, right? The work effort we put in definitely elevates in the weeks prior. I think certainly, over the last 10 years, I've interviewed now more than, 2,500 high-performing students across Australia. And it's been to identify really what are the key things that they do that is different, that enables them to achieve high performance. And one of the key things that really did emerge was the power of consistency. Consistency being incredibly important. So a key differentiator is that, I see a lot of students that go through the boom bust cycle, which is sort of what you're referring to in some respects, like, the boom of crazy work ethic for a short period of time pre-exams and then a bust afterwards because you collapse with exhaustion, and comparing that instead to a more consistent approach. And I think if you were looking at a singular, let's say, assessment block, and you've only got one assessment block, one thing to handle. Of course, consistent work is going to better prepare your foundation, but ultimately, you could put everything on the line to do your best, hit a wall at the end and be okay, because you don't need to then back it up again for a little while. You've got recovery time. And so theoretically, in situations like that, a big boom and bust cycle is workable. I think the problem when we locate for a moment back to school, but even more broadly in life, is that that's not the norm. So if we think about year 12, for example, sure, term 4 have 6 weeks school holidays to recover. So arguably you have a recovery period. Term 1, you've got the Easter holidays, 2 weeks to recover. But then the real challenge becomes that at the end of term 2, you've got holidays, sure, but you've then got trials immediately after. And then you've got term 3 and you've got holidays, sure, but you've got HSC after. So the challenge is if you're going for a boom bust and really trying to do high levels of work, you might be able to get away with it for the first half of year 12, but in the second half of year 12, you're not going to get the recovery time that you might otherwise need to then be able to go hard again. You're going to need to have consistent work. The second factor as well, I'd say here, is that in most cases, it's not in a singular exam, it's an exam block. You might be fine for the first couple of exams and start hit a wall. And then with the HSC, I'm assuming we're talking in a HSC context here, you've got 10 units that you need to get over the line. And so, in short, my big recommendation is that consistency is absolutely key. You're going to be able to perform across exam blocks and across an entire year at much, much higher levels if you're taking a more consistent approach, without a doubt. Now, I don't know if that answers your question, but that certainly would be my recommendation.
With consistency, there are a lot of times I've seen people, I myself have done it a couple of times as well, where you're like, I can implement this. And it seems doable, sustainable, but after like 2 or 3 weeks, you start to lose the motivation to actually continue. How do you manage to stay driven throughout high school and even now? And what tips would you give people if they were trying to find motivation?
So yes, good challenge. I think we all experience it, and I'm certainly no exception. What I would say, number one, is, look, there are a couple of things that can help. Public accountability goes a long way. So if you have to do something on your own and you're then going to have to rely on your own motivation, your own willpower, and as you've highlighted, that can frequently run out. So my first suggestion is, where possible, do things with friends, do things with with siblings, with colleagues, with people around you that can help you stay motivated. So that's really a question of who's in your support team. If you look at elite athletes that are needing to commit to incredible training regimens over many years, let's say you're an Olympic athlete, you're preparing 4 years for a single event, maintaining a level of consistency and discipline required over a 4-year period is incredibly difficult. And they don't do it alone. They have a support team, they've got coaches, trainers, mentors, friends, family around them that support them doing that. And so my first bit of feedback is get a support team around you. Really, really critical. You don't have a support team, it's going to be incredibly challenging to maintain on your own the discipline and the willpower required to do that. So that's number one, get a support team. Elite performers, not just if the Olympic, metaphor doesn't speak to you. I mean, if you look at professional performers in performing arts, in CEOs of large companies, all of them in most cases will have support teams, whether or not that's coaches, mentors, advisors around them. And so I think that's really critical. The second thing I would highlight is there's a whole lot of research that shows that often the easiest way to create behavioral change is not through willpower. I know that's something we've spoken about at different times, though. So it's not about saying, hey, I'm going to rely on willpower to make this change. So a simple metaphor, and it's a very simple one, but it's a useful one, is to some extent, our willpower is almost like a fuel tank. We use it throughout the day, and by the end of the day, it can be running pretty low and we make poor decisions. And so there's often, studies that show that we most likely break our diets if we're trying to lose weight, right? And we're relying on willpower to not eat that awesome looking piece of cake late in the night, because at that point we're tired, we've used a whole lot of willpower throughout the day. So
it's also coming off the idea of decision fatigue.
That's right, exactly. So exactly linked to decision fatigue very much. It's why Steve Jobs wore the same clothes every day. He didn't want to waste a decision on lacking importance as that. And so the point here is that what they show is that actually you want to change your environment so it supports the behavior that you're seeking to maintain consistency in, rather than actually trying to rely on that willpower, which is going to ultimately hit fatigue pretty quickly in a given day. So what does that look like? Well, a quick example is that they've done studies that show that it's easier for people to lose weight if you make one good decision initially, remove all food from your household that is potentially diet breaking, rather than keep it there and then have to use willpower. So the environmental change makes it easier for you to continue the consistency of good eating. And so the point would be really to encourage students who are trying to stay consistent to evaluate what environmental change do I need to put in place? Does that mean that my phone, if I'm really struggling to maintain consistency in not getting distracted with my phone and internet, right? Is it that I'm going to literally remove my phone from the room that I'm studying in for my periods of study? It could be something as simple as that, but that's a lot more effective than trying to use your willpower to avoid checking your phone. And it's just simply an environmental change. So big feedback here is think about environmental change. What environmental change can you make? That would be the second thing. Final sort of piece of advice was, I think, more broadly motivation. I think you were getting at.
Yeah.
And I would probably say the big picture for motivation is, honestly, if you don't know why you're doing something, it can be really challenging to stay motivated. I mean, there's a quote, I'm probably going to butcher it massively, but it's this idea that, a person that has a why can withstand any what. And I think the point being is that, if you have a really good reason for why you're doing what you're doing and you can reflect on that in moments where motivation lags, it's going to be it's essentially a renewable source of motivation. And I think that's going to be really critical. So I'd really encourage students, if you are struggling with motivation, to really try to get clarity on why are you working hard? Like, what are the goals that you're seeking to achieve? Why are those goals important to you? Are there things that you can do to make those goals as real and as tangible as possible so that it's easier for you to really feel the goal and use that as inspiration?
And trying to tell people to be able to find a purpose and then...
Yeah, which is not easy. I get that, which is why I started with two things that are a lot easier to do, right? Get people to help you stay accountable, an accountability buddy, a support network. Two, change your environment. And that could be, as we talked about, moving your phone out of the room. It could even be actually just changing the location at which you study so that you actually hold more accountable. And then the third is, yes, much harder to do, but ultimately as well incredibly powerful over the long term, which is having really great clarity on why you're doing what you're doing.
We've talked about consistency and utilizing transition moments, but what do you think are some other small things that would continually add up to bigger lifestyle changes and improvements?
Is this lifestyle more broadly, in terms of
Just in
living a good life?
We're just talking, trying to attain a balance and just the small things, because an environmental change is a pretty small thing you can do. So it's using transition moments, but finding a purpose is...
It's a big one, and that will take time, without a doubt.
So are there any other small ones that you would recommend people to become more focused or to not be as stressed or something like that?
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, there's a couple of questions in there if we unpack. I think your first one was, for example, to find more focus and some small things that you could do to find more focus. Look, I read a recent study, and it's going to come back to your phone. I mean, I think one of the things, if we're talking about focus, is what are the biggest sources of distraction in your life? Work that out. I mean, and you've got screen time and the like on your phones. You've got your internet browsing history on your computer. Both those will tell you what your main sources of distraction are. And if we're talking about focus, a study basically showed that if you have your phone, even if it's off or on airplane mode next to you while you study, your cognitive performance falls. And that's because of something called cognitive load. And we've got a limited capacity to take on information and understand it and process it. And having your phone on the table, even next to it, and if it's off, creates a low-level distraction, and it reduces your cognitive performance. So one, I would just say really practically, be really aware of what your distractions are, to the extent of use your phone screen time to identify what are the top 4 apps that you spend the most time getting distracted in, if that's one of your key distractions. And then just environmental change, set up your phone to minimize that distraction. So a couple of examples that I've done personally, because I'm no different to anyone else. Phones are designed to distract us. I've set up my phone where I have gone through the settings and actually turned off all notifications. I've hidden all of my social media apps. So they're there, but they're hidden second, third page in a folder, in the 4th page of that folder. And that's just out of sight, out of mind, right? And so it makes it a little more challenging. I mean, you're looking at my phone now, I've deleted everything almost, so that it's, my basic menu is almost to phone and Google Maps. Is like my fast key. So one, it's, you can change your environment, isn't just your physical environment. So this is like focus, and it's small things you can do. It's also your digital environment. And so the same thing can be taken across for, your computer and other devices you use, and how do you actually set them up. Stress and anxiety, I think, was the other thing that you were mentioning, and some small things. Look, two things I would recommend there is really small lifestyle changes that you could make. This is going to seem perhaps a little unusual, but there's a lot that shows the power of exercise on mental health. And I know that's something that we've had chats about at different points as well, just in terms of exercising, and I know in my own life, when I've struggled at times with my own sort of mental health, exercise has been a really powerful way. It releases endorphins, and so one, I would encourage people, no matter how busy it gets during school and university, to continue to find a way to do exercise. And that can actually be really small. I know in our heads we build it up to be like, oh, I've got to go on this big run.
3 hours at the gym.
I've got to join the gym and do 5 hours a week. And there are much smaller things that you can do. I mean, these are going to sound ridiculous, but honestly, like, never catch an elevator, always take the stairs. Seems silly, but actually is a basic lifestyle change. Goes a long way. Wherever, something's in walking distance, like walk instead of, drive, catch public, transport, whatever it might be. See how you can integrate some basic body weight exercises into your everyday. So it's, push-up challenges, pull-up challenges, squat challenges. I mean, these are things that you can do literally, like I do when life is busy. As a personal example, I do like a 5-minute body weight challenge. Life's crazy, and you have all this stuff that's going on, and the one thing that you'll say to yourself is, I don't have time to exercise. And I hate it, maybe. But we always have 5 minutes. So that would be one small thing that I'd recommend is how do you build in some exercise, even if it's like 5-minute challenges 3 times a week. That alone will have an impact. And the final sort of hack, well, not hack, but simple lifestyle recommendation that I'd have would be some basic form of meditation. For those of you that don't know what meditation is, it's essentially just having presence on your breath, and paying attention to your breath. The quality of our breath has huge impacts on our emotional self-regulation. So our ability to turn our flight and fight system off and turn our rest and digest system on, which is really critical for essentially managing times where we feel anxious. So our breath is the thing that controls that. It's the thing that causes the switch to go on and off. And we're often very poor at paying attention to our breath. And then when we need to pay attention to our breath, which is when we might be feeling anxious, it's sort of too late, because then we start to apply breathing and it's like, it's not working. Why isn't it working? It's like, well, because you haven't built the muscle. So a real simple other suggestion I would make to students is to just, a 5-minute meditation. There's a bunch of apps. There's Calm, there's Headspace, there's mindfulness.com. There's a huge heap that do free guided meditations. I'd massively recommend, even if it's a couple times a week, particularly if you're a student that does feel a bit of anxiety. Even if not, it also improves your cognitive performance. So if you're wanting to be at your best academically, it's also incredibly powerful. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I was just going to say, on the topic of stress and anxiety, I find it really helpful. Get up in the morning, spend like 5 minutes even. It wakes you up faster. You find yourself much more efficient in the morning if you spend like 5 minutes doing some star jumps or some body weight exercises. And then in the night, spend like another 5 minutes, 10 minutes of your day for all of this. Spend 5 minutes meditating. You calm your mind down. You fall asleep faster. And don't sleep with your phone.
That's right.
Is a big one. Do not... Just another room, out of sight, out of mind.
That's right. And that's something, I definitely can agree with. I mean, my own experience is, I don't sleep with my phone anywhere, near the bedroom as well for that very reason. So, great to see that you're living, you're living some of these in action as well, Ali.
Through the Pathfinder program, you try to teach these sorts of soft skills to people. And how do you think that students should actually implement it? Because we've talked about a lot, and then we've also said accountability buddies. But a lot of times they're kind of like personal, like they're in the house, and you find it really hard to call up your friend and be like, hey, can you watch me? I need to make sure I put a phone in another room while I study. So how would you actually manage to implement that?
Yeah, great question. I mean, one, it's why when I talked about accountability, it was about your support team, and some of that will be your family as well, right? If it's at home. So I know that depends on the relationship you have with your parents, but ultimately, during high school and life, I mean, they're there to help you, and they're going to want the best for you. And so, if you are at home and you're struggling with that, get your family involved. If it's not your parents, get a sibling. You might have a better relationship with a sibling. That would be a first thing. I think beyond that, though, beyond just the accountability, look, this is going to depend a little bit on personality. There's a couple of things you can do. The first is you can create some frameworks for your own accountability. So that could be, something that I've used personally is, I'll create like a habit tracker. Where it's like key habits that I'm trying to maintain. And in fact, this was actually, something that, again, elite athletes use. So, Cadell Evans is Australia's most successful cyclist. He's won the Tour de France, which is, the biggest possible cycling race in the world. And, one of the things that he talked about is, like a young, 16, 17, 18-year-old cyclist trying to pursue a professional career was that he would essentially have like a habit track, which was these things that he was trying to achieve, and he'd be like ticking off how he went. And so it's something I know that I've done personally is that I have a key couple of habits I'm trying to make, and at the end of each day, I'm like ticking off how I'm going and what I've done. And I might be sharing that with someone after the fact. And then also doing then a rating at the end of a week and a self-reflection. So, and this was something that, Cadell would do as well with his training. He'd rate, okay, what was the quality of my training like this week? Was it a 5, out of 5? Was it a 3 out of 5? Was it a 1 out of 5? Was it a 2 out of 5? And what do I need to do differently for next week? And so in essence, it was creating a bit of a reflection, because I think often what happens is we try to do the habit. As you said, it's too hard to call a friend, whatever, and then we just stop. And there isn't a reflection point to go, well, wait a minute, like, how did I go? I did pretty well this week. Didn't go so well this week. And then to have a reflection point to go, what am I going to do differently next week, and how do I change that? So they're two things that I've used personally. And, I know that my personality, that's why I said it's a bit of personality type. My personality type is when I see, a week and there's 2 that I didn't hit the checkbox for doing it, like I'm much more motivated the next week to go, how do I get this done? So for some people, that element can work really powerfully. For others, it's being able to show that for accountability to someone else. And for others, it's actually the self-reflection component. It helps them stay more committed to knowing that actually, even if I wasn't perfect this week, what's important is consistency and continuing to have a crack again next week. Because ultimately, if you're doing it 1 out of 5 times in a week instead of 5, that's still better than 0. And you probably would do 0 if you just quit. And so part of it's that. Look, the third thing at habit stacking is basically one of the things that can be difficult is creating a habit is hard. It can take 66 days on average to create a new habit. There's no perfect number for each individual. Some of us create habits quicker than others. On average, when they did the meta study, it was 66 days. So the point being is that a new habit's difficult. So instead of trying to create a new habit from scratch, the idea is you stack it on to an existing habit that you do. So for example, instead of saying, I'm going to, let's say, do 5 push-ups every morning, because that was one of the things that we talked about as a really basic lifestyle change that you could make that would increase your health. You could stack it onto something else that you do in the morning. So for example, it could be that, okay, as I pour my milk on my, like this is what I do. Okay, I'll share an example of how I've had it stacked in my own life. I'll make my breakfast every morning. I am very Australian. I eat Weet-Bix religiously. And, I'll pour my milk, and I'm going to admit, maybe it's sacrilegious. I like soggy Weet-Bix. Okay? Not very Australian of me. So I will pour my milk, and to habit stack, as I poured my milk, as I'm waiting for my milk to just, get to the right soggy point that I enjoy, I'll do some push-ups.
Yeah.
And so what I've done is I've integrated an existing habit that I know I'm going to do all the time with one that I'm trying to develop. So rather than set like, okay, I'm going to have this entirely special time to do this habit, I'm going to stack what I'm doing onto something that I've already got as a habit that happens every day, or for whatever frequency you might want. And so it's a really simple way that you can add habits. So is there a way that you have habit stacked in your own life?
I haven't specifically done it like that, but I have habits and then I try to build on them to increase them. Like, for example, using a to-do list. You've seen mine. The first week it was complete mayhem. And then the second week I tried to get it a bit more organized. Like I created separate columns. The third week you came back and you're like, you should use in and out trays. You should use the due dates and the categories. And gradually, I just try to increase my habits over time until they like reach a point where I'm cool with doing it. Something like that seems to work better for me.
Great, and so that's less habit stacking, and that's more what we were talking about in some respects. Remember the first thing we said was like habit tracking and reflection.
Yep.
And reflection in you've reflected on your system and your habit, and then gone, what am I going to tweak in this? Or at least not even tweak, like I'm just going to do it again. Because sometimes that's what it is. Often the case is we give up habits way too early. We start one, we fail after 2 weeks in doing it perfectly, and we think it's not working, we throw it out the window, when really our journey to a habit is a gradual one. And it's about staying committed to going, all right, let's have another crack. And so, look, I think there's two strategies we've really unpacked there. But that second one there is, I think, connected to that idea of reflecting and commitment to the consistency of just keep on having a go. But I'd also encourage habit stacking.
I'm going to present you with 3 personality types. It's an extreme winner, a perfectionist, and a person who just tries their best and takes everything that comes. Which do you believe like the most beneficial going through school and
what's an
through
extreme
life?
winner? How do you define extreme winner?
It's like the people who always have to win. Like Michael Jordan would be an example.
Okay.
He always
So it's not
has to
someone
win.
that wins necessarily all the time, but it's a mindset of high levels of competition.
Yes.
Okay.
Extremely driven, and their mindset is that they have to win.
So we've got the extreme winner, mindset have to win. We've got
a perfectionist.
So it has to be perfect.
Yeah. And then we have a person who their mindset is they have to put in the best effort they can.
Is this a trick question?
I mean, it can be.
Yeah, okay. Look, what I would first say and I'll make some comments on each one of these, and then I'll share. There's something called Memetic Theory. It's by a French philosopher called René Girard. I don't know if we've ever spoken about this before. Have we spoken about this before?
We have not, no.
We haven't. So, a Memetic Theory basically is that we innately as human beings learn by copying. So when we're, a couple of months old, we're already learning rapidly from our parents and adults around us. We're not being actively taught, we copy, right? And so it's why, we learn that, no one teaches us to smile. We see other people smile, we smile. So my point here is that copying is very, very powerful because it's how as a species we learn and develop and grow. There is a problem with copying in that at a certain point, when you copy others, you become increasingly like other people. And if you become increasingly like other people, you start facing competition, or you start competing. And then on top of that, ultimately what Memetic Theory highlights is that we tend then, while there is abundant resources, that's fine. If you're copying someone and you're competing, there's lots of resources, no problems. You're not fighting over resources. At a certain point, though, you hit a perspective whereby you start fighting over the same resources, and that creates Memetic Conflict, where there's conflict occur. And so the basic premise I would say is that Western society, in many respects, because it's a capitalist society, is predicated on the idea of competition. Right? We compete, and through competition, we innovate and we get better. And to some extent, that is good. Yeah. Okay, to some extent, that is good. But the point I'm trying to highlight is that competition to the extreme, therefore, is destructive. Right? When we're competing and we're competing over the similar sets of resources, we start actually creating conflict, and it becomes destructive. And the same thing, therefore, applies in an individual context. Competition can be powerful to elevate someone to high levels of performance. Michael Jordan's a really good example of that, okay?
Yeah.
But at the same time, in most cases, at that level of that extreme, it's also incredibly destructive on the people that are driven in that way. And I know, and myself as someone that is quite competitive, it's something that I've struggled with myself for a long time in wanting to win, and then the pressure that places on yourself, that you place on yourself, and also the fact that in most cases, the way that you drive yourself to win, therefore, is from a point of really connecting your self-worth to winning. And that can be really dangerous, right, for your mental health, where when you don't win, because inevitably, you can't win at everything. You might win at a couple of things because you're fantastic, but there's many, many talented people in the world. There's going to be a point where you don't win, and that can have really disastrous impacts on your mental health because you've connected your identity and self-worth to it. So, what I would say is that as a result, while I think having a healthy appreciation of competition is good because it can elevate your performance, I wouldn't say that being an extreme winner in the sense of needing to win is healthy. or necessarily the best pathway to long-term performance. Because often if you're highly competitive, you're going to go into what's called sort of zero-sum games where there's a winner and a loser. And it means that you end up often, hurting a lot of people along the way because you're there to win. And, I think a lot of, Michael Jordan's teammates feel that way.
Yeah.
So that would be my commentary on option number 1 that you gave me. Option number 2 was, unless you have a comment you want to add to that.
Oh, yeah. I also have, when you were explaining that, I felt that really relate to the HSC. And everyone is like almost at each other's throats to try and come out on top.
It really is, isn't it?
I feel like it'd just be so much more efficient if people just work together, right? Because it's working as a group and the group determines the individual marks. So by creating that level of conflict, aren't you just dropping everyone's marks down?
Well, it's tricky. As I said, it's competition creates this drive to excel. It creates this drive to do better, and so there is real power in competition. I mean, it's why arguably capitalist economic systems have been so successful over such a long period of time. In terms of generating growth, they might be not so successful at a whole lot of other different outcomes, right? So I think when it comes to it, yes, right. Competition is good to a certain extent, but yeah, I think.
When it reaches conflict.
Yeah, when it reaches conflict, it's not great. And I think the concern is if you really want to stand out longer term, if you play the competition game, the only way that you can stand out is if you win. Because we live in a society where winner takes all. Superstar effect, Pareto laws, universal law, universal power laws basically show that the distribution of things is a winner takes all. So, for example, the wealthiest few people in the world disproportionately own more wealth than everyone else. Book sales, the top 3 authors outsell everyone else. The top music, artists out-earn everyone else. The top athletes out-earn everyone else. So we live in a society where it's largely a winner takes all. And that's been accelerated in many respects by both globalization and technological disruption and adoption. So the point is, if you play a competition game, you end up needing to be a winner, right? You either win or you're not a winner, and that's not nice. So the concern I have with the sort of school system in terms of the ATAR is that, yeah, it's a competition, you're trying to compete for ranks, and if you want to play that game, you can, but you're trying to come out at the 99.95.
Yeah,
48 kids get it, right? Pretty challenging.
Yeah.
So you could do that, and that's an entirely viable strategy that you can play. The alternative is to go, hey, wait a minute, right? Like, I could step out of the competition, and if I step out of the competition and I'm not trying to compete, one, what that means is, it's not to say that I'm still not going to try to get better and grow and improve and so forth, right? But all of a sudden, I'm not playing the same game where I'm trying to be one of those 48 students, let's say, in year 12 to get a 99.95, or in whatever career it is. And it's like, hey, how do I instead differentiate myself? How do I play an entirely different game? So instead of competing so that there's conflict and there's a winner takes all, and I might not end up at the end of the road being that person with the outcomes I'd like, I can instead play a different game, right? Not compete and carve out my own space for myself. And I think that's the challenge with HEC in some respects, because I think it really does drive home this sense that the best way to get ahead in the world is to compete. Because we compete, we get an ATAR, and that's what we hold up as success, and therefore that's what we should do when we go into the real world, into our careers, into our businesses. But actually, if you then were to take that same mindset into business and you were competing, you would become increasingly homogenous, increasingly like your competitors. As an individual, if you're trying to stand out for employment and career opportunities, if you're competing with all your peers, trying to get the same internships at the same big companies, try to do the same things, you look exactly the same as all of your peers. And the irony is you actually, therefore, either are the winner takes all or you get no opportunity. Where if you differentiate and do things differently, all of a sudden you stand out and you can carve out a space for opportunity for yourself. So that's probably my big rant. I know that's maybe a little bit of a rant about my concerns with the fact that our competition ideology really starts when we're in school, and it doesn't, I think, set us up for healthy mental lives, but also for actually pursuing opportunities that will create positive outcomes for us. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I kind of feel like school really does foster it, and they don't even try to try to change it. They don't try to explain. Well, kind of. They have that little thing about teamwork is good. You all should work together. But in practice, they seem to want to foster it. Like they try to foster your competition, not to conflict, because that would be quite damaging for the school, but to like the highest level they can. I guess it's the most efficient way to get people to work harder.
Sure. And that's it. But I think that's also the challenge, right? Just because it's the most efficient doesn't mean it's always the best. And I think coming to your point, look, big believer in the power of working together and collaborating over competition. And I think another idea to throw in there is game theory. I think, have we spoken about game theory before? I feel like we might have. And maybe the good example is the prisoner's dilemma. You've got two prisoners that they're caught for committing a supposed crime, but there's no evidence. They're set to separate rooms, and you ask one of them, did you commit this? If you admit to this, we'll give you a special deal, and the other guy will go to prison. And the point of this is that in a single interaction, this is game theory essentially. In a single interaction, it always serves to be selfish, right? And if you were just having like a one-off, it's like, yeah, okay, well, the outcome here is if I don't admit to this, and the other person dobs me in, I've got big jail time. Yeah. But if I actually say they did it and I did it, I'll get a special sentence, but it'll be less. So the point here is that in a single interaction, most times when we compete, it's often better for us in a single interaction to try to play winner takes all, go hard, win. But life isn't a single interaction. It's a series of interactions. And when you look at it as a series of interactions, actually collaboration over the long term also plays much bigger dividends in your own success. Because if you were super competitive in that first interaction, the next time around, people are like, oh, don't work with that person.
It's almost like with the prisoner's dilemma. If you both say no, then they have nothing on either of you. So you're both free. If you both are very competitive, you might even both end up saying yes.
That's right. And then you're both in jail, right, in that example. And also, you don't trust the other person anymore.
Yeah.
So you don't collaborate anymore. And so I think that the point here is just with game theory is that over the long term, collaborating, not being selfish, helping others, right, are key things that actually set people up for success. Like I look at, short of, maybe your athletes that are in individual pursuits that are very, singular focused. If I look at people that I respect in careers, the most successful people, honestly, are those that have helped the most people. I know that sounds cliche. Like it hasn't been where they've been super competitive and trying to like climb up the ladder super quickly. There are people that have done that and then very quickly a reputation develops and then they go no further. So the most successful people are those that actually, yes, step out of the ideology of competition and trying to compete. One, because they don't want to necessarily be the same as everyone else, because then you lack distinction. But secondly, by helping others, it actually means that there's more people willing to help them, and that fast tracks what they do. So your initial question was those three.
Yeah, it was an extreme winner, a perfectionist, or a person who puts in the highest level of effort.
So that's quite a long sort of unpack of that first one.
Yes.
But hopefully some interesting ideas. The second one was perfectionist.
I read and heard a lot that the biggest procrastinators are always perfectionists.
Yeah.
Because they want to get it perfect and then they don't want to start it thinking that it won't be perfect.
Look, and there's a lot of good and bad things about perfectionists. So one of the things I would say is yes, obviously there's a whole, there's a great phrase and it's particularly, relevant in the sort of the startup community, which is done is better than perfect. Yeah. Right? Launch early, fail fast, get feedback, right? And I think the challenge with perfectionism is certainly that, yes, you can procrastinate a lot and not get it done, but also the way that we grow and develop, Ali, and we've talked about this, the power of a feedback loop. You don't grow and get, and improve if you keep everything to yourself and try to perfect it. You might, but actually the rate of your ability to self-critique to perfect is a lot slower than if you put something out to the world, got feedback from other people when it's not perfect, and then continue to iterate. So the way we learn and improve is that the pace that we move through a feedback loop. And ultimately, if the goal is actually to produce something perfect, the irony is that the best way to get there is to launch early, get feedback and iterate, because you're going to get a quicker feedback loop. So I think, yes, that's definitely, I think, a real challenge. And I would certainly say, look, I don't think being a perfectionist is, in that sense, the best pathway to personal growth. What I would say, though, is there are a lot of real strengths in being a perfectionist. That as an employer, we have hundreds of team across east coast of Australia, and over many years of hiring many people and leading and managing many people, one of the key skills that he's really missing is an attention to detail and high standard. And it's so simple, right? Like, you would think that it's really hard to differentiate yourself in a career, but actually one of the simplest things that you could do is actually have an attention to detail in the quality of the work that you produce. So my point here is that being a perfectionist, or at least having an element of that within you, is actually really good, because it's what's going to enable you to show high standards and to show an attention to detail. So the sweet spot really, Ali, is if we could create this perfect set of skills, is someone that has a perfectionist streak, but is able and comfortable to deal with the sort of the possible fear of putting stuff out there early, to still take advantage of that fast feedback loop.
But also having competitiveness.
Well, as I said, that's, like
a little bit, a level of competitiveness.
There's a certain level, but I think often, look, I'll share a quick story. I think the other challenge with competitiveness is often you can get sucked into doing things that you don't actually really want to do. So what I mean is that because we innately copy others to learn, we'll see other people and we'll copy them.
Yeah.
And we can sort of get triggered by that, right? When someone does something, you're like, oh, that's cool. And you'll copy it, and then you'll go, wait a minute, did I even want to do this? Like, why am I doing this? And I know I've had those moments where I've seen something and I'm like, oh, yeah, let's do that. And then I've started doing it. And I'm thinking, I hate this. Why am I doing it? And I realized, oh, yeah, that's right. And so that's where I think one of the really key things, and I see that often actually, to be really frank, it's something I see in selective schools. My own experience, to a lesser degree, is that you've got a whole lot of hyper-intelligent, hyper-driven people in a fairly closed environment, okay? And when you're in that closed environment, you're sort of looking at all your peers, and all of a sudden one peer's like, oh, I think I want to do medicine, or I think I want to do, law. And it's like, oh, I'm going to need to get a certain ATAR for that. And you're like, oh, well, I need to get a certain ATAR then, right? And there's this really subtle, you don't even realize you're competing because you're innately copying, because that's what we're hardwired to do. And then all of a sudden you're copying someone and it's not really necessarily what you want to do because you haven't taken the time to interrogate what you want to do, but you think it's what you want to do. I think it's, it's not to say that you shouldn't work on areas sometimes that you identify are, areas of growth. Weaknesses that you want to improve. I think a lot of the time, though, myself, I'm going to speak from personal experience, right, can work on something because we see someone else do it and we're like, oh, that's cool. It's a weakness, sure, but it's also in an area that's not something that we'll ever be particularly good at or want to be good at. And so we don't necessarily then spend as much time leaning into strengths and actually really growing our strengths. And that's one of the dangers of competition, because it's sort of copying on steroids, right? Where you're trying to always one up and get better and push. So a little bit of copying is certainly good, but I think the danger is at any point that we fall into that trap. And so I think it's just, you want to have a little bit of copying and a little bit of competition to drive growth and learning and innovation, but you need to also have some self-awareness as to why that's happening. And then certainly, as we talked about, right, and this is a great way to unpack some key skills just for life, is that mixture of being able to be comfortable with releasing stuff early when it's not perfect, because it's going to accelerate your feedback loop, but at the same time, setting a high standard for yourself. And what was the third one?
The third one was a person who just puts in the maximum effort and then deals with whatever result that they get.
Look, I mean, it sounds like a great approach. I mean, it sounds very, stoic, if we're talking about philosophy for a moment, a very sort of stoic philosophy, and not stoic like putting up with the pain, but like stoicism in the sense of, that what matters is not necessarily the outcome, but the input, in terms of, are you living up to your values? And if you've, put the work in and done whatever it is in accordance with your values, then that itself should be what makes you fulfilled, right? So look, I see a lot of value in that. I mean, I think out of the three approaches you've shared, it's probably the most mentally healthy and honestly the most sustainable as well, right? In the sense that, you're not doing the work necessarily because you're trying to compete and outdo someone else. You're doing it for different reasons, for personal fulfillment, for alignment with the personal values of who you are. And then I think certainly in the sense of failure, like a failure and obstacles are going to be undoubted.
Yeah,
we all experience them, right? And so being able to really face them with a sense of perspective, knowing that they're coming and that the way to get through them is to keep on going, I think sounds really powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone through all three of them, not to like the full extreme. And out of all three, I feel like the last one is 100% like the most healthy for me at least. And I just find tuning out everything else helps you focus a lot more on what you yourself want to do, and you don't find yourself doing useless things. And it's a lot easier then as well to like find a purpose for what you're doing, because you're not doing something because of someone else or because you need to get it exactly to an almost unattainable standard. You're just doing it because it's something that you want to do and you want to grow with.
That's awesome to hear that you've made the sort of journey to that point. And look, I think the big thing as well is that you're not connecting your identity to outcome. In the first two, your identity is connected to outcome, right? The perfectionist, it must be perfect because I want people to see myself that way. In the case of the extreme winner, it's like I must win because I need to be seen as a winner. And as we see, they're dangerous things to do, to connect your identity to outcome. Ultimately, I mean, there's always things out of our control. Always.
Yeah.
And so if you're connecting your identity to outcome, you're going to have really big swings and roundabouts in your mental health. And then also, of course, your ability to keep the course and stay consistent. So I think what's really powerful about that third mindset, persona, perspective to take on board is that your identity is connected to, am I living up to
My standards.
my standards, right, in that working hard? And actually, it's not about the outcome, although the irony is the outcome often comes.
You're more likely to achieve this well in terms of like putting in your effort or being a perfectionist. You're a lot more likely to achieve the outcome by just putting in the effort instead of like, I must get it correct. It has to be perfect before I do anything with it.
Definitely.
And there again, the feedback loop would come back in as well. Because with the first two, you don't really want to. Because with an extreme winner, you'd be like, oh, I need to be better than the people giving me feedback. And with a perfectionist, you'd be like, I don't want anyone to see it until it's perfect. But if you're just putting in the effort, you're giving it out to people. You're like, come on, give me feedback. I need this. It's going to make it better.
Definitely.
And I feel like it'd just be more constructive overall. We're taught that the HSC is the most important thing, but many successful people state that your final school exams don't even matter. What do you think about this? There's an Elon Musk one where he says, I never completed university, but the people under me did. Just things like that, like Mark Zuckerberg dropping out of university, Warren Buffett saying university is useless.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's two questions in there I'm hearing.
Yes.
One is the question of
HSC,
HSC,
and
the other is uni. Okay,
yeah,
let's
and
maybe start with the HSC. Look, it's easy for me to say the HSC doesn't matter. It's true in the sense that no one will, like, for the very short window of time after your HSC, maybe a month, people will talk about an ATAR.
and get the UAC, and then
Yeah, and then after that, once you're in a degree, no one talks about it. So the HSC certainly is important in opening doors.
Yeah.
Okay, like, there's always alternate pathways and alternate entries to get into whatever degree and pathway you might want.
Yeah.
But where the HSC is helpful, and an ATAR is helpful, is that it'll open doors, and if you get the ATAR you're seeking, it'll open them quicker. In the sense of if you don't get the ATAR, you've got a slightly longer alternate pathway option. So I would say that, look, there is certainly some importance, therefore, because we've got speed and we've got options that get created as a result of the outcomes you create. I think on the flip side, though, the level of anxiety that we might build up around it is not worth those speed and options, because ultimately we can still achieve options in alternate ways. And from a speed perspective, there is also a bunch of other options that mean that you're actually not necessarily behind, so to speak, okay, whether or not you're doing, diploma programs or whatever it might be at a university level. So I think it's important, but perhaps not as important as we can sometimes feel when we're in the moment. I think the challenge, though, is that you only realize that when you're out of it and you've got perspective.
Yeah.
And so I can tell that to people. It's like, well, it doesn't matter, but it doesn't feel that way. My felt experience right now is it is the most important thing in my life, and I get that.
I feel like it's also because they don't really teach you about anything else. They're like, HSC, you have to do well. You have nothing else.
Look, I think the students that tend to be able to manage the stress of HSC the most effectively tend to be those that also have the most perspective.
Yeah.
Whether it's because, they've done a whole bunch of work already and they've just seen, maybe they've traveled depending on their school or their parents. And I do find that the students that tend to do well but without as much stress tend to either just have a genetic predisposition to not stress, because that exists, right? We have different levels that we're built with, or they have more perspective. So, the hard part, as I said, is I could say that, it's not important. But unless you get that perspective yourself, it's very, very hard. And so I think it's important to an extent, but not to the degree that perhaps we feel at the time.
It's not the be all end all. There's still other things you can do.
Yeah, without a doubt. Definitely. I think there are so many other pathways. I think that the big thing that's interesting, Ali, is that, and this is just connecting to the future of work as well, is that I think historically, very much there was an idea that you work hard, you do well at school, you go to uni, you do hard at uni, and then learning stops. In the sense of like, you've done your training, you've done your education, and because you've done that, that's going to open the doors to all your opportunities. I mean, we live in a world now where, based on the number of jobs, it's likely that millennials will have 17 different jobs over 5 different industries and careers. To do that, it means that throughout your career, you're going to have to constantly be relearning significant amounts. So you might do a uni degree, but that's not the end of learning. And it's where universities are transitioning to very, very slowly, but where certainly alternate education is filling the gap is with micro-credentialing, to this idea of ongoing learning, but with key sort of smaller things that you're going to pull out. Now, the point I'm trying to highlight with this is that's actually a fantastic opportunity, because what if you screwed your HSC?
Yeah.
What if you don't do so well at university? Does that mean that, okay, from then on your opportunities are limited? Well, no, because actually learning is ongoing, and increasingly you'll be doing micro-credentials to step into new career opportunities. And so it means that you almost get a lot of refresh buttons along the way, where it's like, or, like a new life, right? Like you're playing a video game and you're like screwed up that level. It's like, all right, I've got another shot at this. Let's have another go, right? But it's with a new area of training and learning. Now, that's not to say that you should just, as a result, screw things up along the way, just because that exists. But I think the point very much is that even if you were to screw up your HSC,
you should just be adaptable.
There's plenty of other opportunities in training and learning that you can seek that will create a whole lot of opportunity for you. And, that's one of the great things about the future that we're living in right now in terms of the way both, higher education and work is moving. You added a second question about uni in there.
Yeah, it was also, do you believe that uni is a necessity for success?
I mean, definitely not as a necessity. I mean, look, if you look at the data right now, you will still, over the course of your career, earn more if you're university educated on average. And I think this is an important thing to look at in the sense of when we talk about, your Warren Buffetts or the Elon Musks or the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, right, that drop out of uni to pursue other options.
Yep.
In most cases, they are exceptions to a rule. And what they show is that it is distinctly possible to be hyper successful without university. If we look at aggregate, going to university still will overall mean that you will have a better financial outcome for yourself, for your wealth and prosperity over the long term. But what we've got to now look at is cause and effect. Is that because you actually went to university, or is it because of other factors?
Like you were driven enough to put in the hours, or you just went through university, I'm going to do minimum effort, get my degree, I'm off.
Yeah, and look, I think historically that was probably the case, right? Where university did, just because of the types of roles that you were able to get that were more white-collar professional, you were being paid more, and therefore there was a clearer correlation. I mean, what's happening right now is 1 in 3 university graduates can't find a full-time job. It's taking them on average 4.7 years to find a full-time job in Australia. And so what that shows is that there's a significant amount of university graduates that are not finding work. Yep. And as we've got increasing numbers of university graduates graduating in Australia, we've also got more competition, right? We've got, this problem where now we've got degree inflation, where, you need to have not only an undergraduate, but sometimes a master's and try to do your PhD, because all of a sudden, to stand out, everyone's got a degree. So we can see the problem of competing coming back to highlight this theme, right? And so my point here is that I actually think where we're moving is that I think increasingly university is still useful. I think there's many great things about it, but its value as on its own, as standalone, as a way to get a job and as a way to be able to stand out and to be prosperous for yourself long term, is becoming slightly more questionable. Now that depends on what career path you take, because all the examples you gave were business. And so I think one of the things to be very mindful is that there are a whole swathe of things that you can do career-wise that you can learn in other ways outside of university. And increasingly, they're becoming more and more attractive because of their integration with work. there are still things that university is necessity for, whether or not that's becoming a psychologist, medicine,
law,
engineering. There are still areas that it is required. And so if, yes, you had a pathway and you're like, I want to be a lawyer, a doctor, or, an engineer, I'd still be 100% recommending go and study medicine, study engineering at university. But what I'd be recommending is, look, just doing the degree is probably not going to get you the job.
Yeah.
Right? You're going to have to do other stuff. It's, we talk about a parallel pathway. One of the strategies we support students in Pathfinders with, and that's very much about what else are you doing in addition to your study to differentiate that will help you across the two create the slam dunk. Now, if you're in business, well, it starts to get a little more questionable. What's more useful, learning the theory or building a business?
Degree of entrepreneurship versus being an entrepreneur.
Right. So, again, though, the challenge is, it's a tough question because right now I think we are in that real tipping point. And so my advice still stands that in most cases, going to uni is still going to be better than not, because in aggregate, you will earn more and it will open you up to networks of other smart, motivated people. And those networks will help grow and build your career longer term. But my advice really is that the uni degree is not going to get you the job. So you go there because you're getting the paper for the certification. You go there to build your networks. You go there to delay the onset of immediate work so you can experiment to see what you're actually good at and what you like. But alongside that, you run a parallel pathway.
But if you do decide to go to university, how would you actually end up picking the right course to suit yourself?
There's a very long answer to that question. It's a good question. Look, I think the first thing that I would really encourage anyone to do is to sit back and to really identify a couple of things. The first thing to consider is, and it's tricky because you don't necessarily know the answer to this, but what do you enjoy? And I say the reason you don't necessarily know the answer to that is you might have limited exposure to what's out there. School is everything you know right now. So at a first level, I'd say, look, you've got a 3 to 5 year journey. You want to pick something that you're actually going to be intellectually stimulated in and enjoy, and not just be turning up for the sake of turning up to get the paper. So trying to find something that you think is going to be enjoyable is going to be important. And it's important that you don't just pick something randomly, that you try to go and test it. Test that assumption. Go, and if you're thinking about doing a law degree, go and spend some time with a lawyer.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about, becoming an engineer, see if you can do some work experience, see if you can interview an engineer, see if you can go and spend a day at one of the universities. It's a bit harder with COVID, but sitting in the lectures, right? So one, there is an element of just, what do you enjoy? I think that's important. I think beyond that, though, there's then some things that we can start to think of which can be a little bit more strategic. One of the things that we share is a concept called hybridization. The fastest growing jobs that exist are hybrid jobs. They're basically jobs and careers that involve two disparate sort of areas. And it's the intersection of those two areas where there is the fastest growth in jobs. And that's been done on meta-analysis of jobs globally. And so the point being is, the second thing I would encourage people to think about is, in addition to thinking about something that they may enjoy and testing that, would be to think, what's another tangential related skill or area that I could attach to this so I could create some hybridization and a hybrid skill set for when I graduate. So that's to really consider the double degree, right? Rather than to try to pick a hyper specialized degree, is to think about how do I pick a double in the mix. So that would be the second area that I'd consider. Yeah. And then the third thing to consider, and this is about picking a degree, not necessarily a university. Okay, there's a whole other set there. And this is not even necessarily about how to pick a career, because there's a whole other set of criteria to think about career. The final thing would to then also to be think about, and it's a little bit related to career now, it's what are certain skill sets that are going to be in demand when we start to look at the future of work. Yeah. And to start to think about, either in my hybrid or in my core degree choice, what are some of those skills that I'm going to find that are going to be useful, that are going to, hopefully support my ability to be employable.
That would also come with parallel pathways as well.
That's right. Yeah, you can also explore that. You don't have to do that through your degree.
Yeah.
You're right. You can do that in other ways. Just like the hybridization can be done in other ways outside of double degree, you can do it through hybridization. By parallel pathway or otherwise. So look, 3 simple things to start with. I mean, there's a much longer answer to that, but one is seriously interrogate what you enjoy. And no, I'm not talking about what's prestigious. I'm not talking about what has a high ATAR. Like, that was none of the criteria that I shared here, because that's often where we get gamed and we focus on that. And I did that, certainly, by picking a law degree at Sydney.
Yeah.
It's actually genuinely, what are the things that I enjoy? What are the subject areas I'm going to find interesting? That would be step number one. Number two is hybridization. What is a secondary thing that I could attach to this that would actually massively open up career opportunity for me? And then third, in thinking about that, is what are skills that may be in demand over the long term? And they could be soft skills. When we say soft, non-technical in nature, or they could be technical skills that could actually add significant value.
Moving on a little bit onto parallel pathways. We talked a bit about that, but what are some options that students would have, or uni students would have, if they want to improve their skills and could even help in getting themselves a job?
Yeah, great. Look, I think a really simple thing that a university student could do, even a high school student, if you're particularly, but let's say uni, because I think you asked about uni.
Yeah,
Is that right?
I think a lot more it starts to become a focus in uni.
Yeah, definitely. Look, simplest thing you can do, join a startup. Right, there's really significant startup communities at all the main universities. The great thing about a startup is that one, often they're just looking for anyone that can help, so the barriers to entry to get a role are very, very low. And if you don't have any experience, you need to get experience for most roles, and that's doesn't make any sense, right? It's a paradox. We need to find a way to get experience, and so a startup's great because they'll often, if you're willing to do the work and you're quick at learning, they'll take you. Firstly, that's a great. Secondly, because there's not a huge organization here, you're going to get exposed to a lot more complex things quicker than what you would otherwise be doing in a larger organization that you can't get a job at initially anyway. And then secondly, because often you're not as supervised, because everyone's learning, you're going to have a rapid feedback loop and a rapid growth experience there in terms of learning. So it's going to rapidly accelerate what you learn and what you know much quicker than a lot of other opportunities. So biggest recommendation would be join a startup. Now, why am I saying join a startup, not start a startup? Okay. Look, in some sense, I would recommend, unless you've got a really clear vision for a startup already, joining a startup is a great way to learn from other people's mistakes. Right? You can learn, you can get in, you've got slightly less responsibility, you're not spending copious amounts of hours, so you can still balance university studies. So I would definitely recommend that as a starting point. Beyond that, really I'd recommend a personal project. It's one of the things that we work with students in the Pathfinder program in years 11 and 12 anyway. But that is, if you're not creating a business and a startup, that's not something that's interested. Like, I'm not interested in entrepreneurship. I don't want to be in a business. Like, I get that. At the same time, then, running a separate project alongside university where you're pursuing a passion that can make an impact in your local community is going to teach you a whole lot of incredible skills. It's going to help you build your network. And when it comes to opportunities later down the line, instead of telling someone, oh, I'm really incredible at this, which they're not going to believe you because you're just telling them, you can show them evidence of the fact that you're amazing at that because you did X and Y in your personal project. So if you're an artist and you love art, well, maybe it's to create a whole portfolio of art, build a portfolio website, try to organize your own exhibition, even if only your friends and family show up. Okay, all of a sudden that's showing, the ability to organize, to event manage, to pitch yourself, to brand, to network. It's showcasing all these incredible skills, right, that you wouldn't have otherwise. If you're pursuing journalism or a creative, maybe it's writing a blog, right? It's creating a website. It could be running a podcast like you're doing, Ali, at the moment. It could be, planting an organic vegetable garden for all that matters. I think the point of it is, what are you passionate about? Lean into that, create a project.
This is a bit of a swap in subjects, but as an entrepreneur yourself, what's it really like to put yourself out there and take that final leap of faith?
It's a good question. I think it's possibly a hard one for me to answer because if we go back to your three personas, I've never been in the perfectionist sort of camp, so to speak, in that I've perhaps always been quite comfortable in putting myself out there because I love feedback. Like, I know it's the pathway to growth. Certainly, I haven't had as much of that challenge as others, right? How can you sort of, grapple with it still? Look, it is still a challenge, and there are times where you've got something, you're like, oh, how do I launch? Like, what are people going to think if I launch this? Am I going to look like an idiot if I launch this?
Am I really ready to launch it?
Am I ready to launch it? Yeah, definitely. And I think couple of things. One of the things that has really helped me personally in dealing with my fears of what other people would think. Because in most of the time, that's what this is.
Yeah.
Right? It's fears that we have about how we're going to be perceived and what other people think has been something that, two sort of quotes, and as cliched as they may be, they really stuck with me. One is that I remind myself that when I think other people are going to think about me a lot, that's just my ego tricking me. Like, I'm not that important to other people, and actually they, like, if they're going to think about me, maybe it's for 10 seconds.
So many people in the world.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like, why am I going to be that important that they are really going to spend all this time thinking about me, and saying bad things and doing whatever, right? So for me, it's just a constant reminder that actually, like, I can put a whole lot of stuff out there, but it's just my ego tricking me to think that I'm the most important person in the world, and that's why everyone's going to care about what I do and say.
Yeah.
So I find that just a really helpful helpful self-talk, really, and that's what we're talking about here. How do you deal with this? It's your self-talk as a reminder of, like, you know what? Like, no one's going to care. Like, really. The second thing then is, because then your brain starts going, well, really, but even that 10 seconds, like, what if they say bad things in that 10 seconds? And so then, I developed, I suppose, a second set of self-talk that was really helpful, which was, this idea that it's like those that matter care, and, it's sort of like those that don't care don't matter.
Yeah.
And the point is that actually the people that really care about what I'm doing are often the people that really care about me. And so the thing is, like, yep, okay, even if someone thinks about this and it's 10 seconds and they say bad things, like, the reminder for me is, well, actually, they're not the people I should be listening to. And so there's a great exercise that you can do, and Brene Brown writes about this. She's a fantastic author, and she calls it like her square of confidence. And, it's like a small square. It's like one by one. She's like, you want to keep it small, and you write down the people in there whose opinion matters to you.
Yeah.
So if you're putting stuff out into the world, you want to still have a feedback loop. Like, you don't want to shut down everything and just be like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm freaking awesome, and I don't care what people think. You don't want to go that way, which a lot of people can do as a way to get over their lack of self-confidence to publish, right? And to get out in the world. But you need to listen to something at the same time. But if you listen to too much, you don't ever do anything. So the second strategy connected to this, the first was to change my self-talk. The second was to say, hey, who are the people that matter? And, I have, like, key people that matter to me, so that when I publish something and they give me feedback, and it often is key people on different things, because it's not like one person's going to be able to offer feedback on everything.
Yeah.
So I've got key people on different things, which this comes back to your whole support team
that
we talked about earlier on. And if one of them came to me and said, hey, Rowan, that thing that you did, I have real concerns about it. Here's what I'm thinking. It's like, I've got to listen to that. Because they're one of the people in my square squad, the people that I'm going to listen to in my support team, and I should take that feedback seriously. And so that would be my feedback. If it is something that you struggle with, one, think about, if you do have those feelings, what is the self-talk that you're going to have, and practice that self-talk. So for me, I have that self-talk. And then secondly, think about, hey, who are the people that matter? So who are the people that matter, so that when I put this out into the world, whose feedback will I listen to, and whose feedback will I turn out and just tune out on entirely?
That's also one of Mark Manson's things. He's like, stop caring about everything. You don't have enough brain power pretty much to care about everything. Only care about the things that really matter to you, whether it be people or projects or even like your phone. If it's that important, then it should be one of the few things you care about.
And that's what I'd really recommend, and it's an activity that we do with students, both workshops and schools and in our Pathfinder program, is to take the time to define who your support team is when you're going through, years 11 and 12. And support team in also whose feedback you're going to take seriously. Also, when you're launching a new project, for example, before you launch it, whose feedback matters to you? Because then when you launch it and, you get haters or whatever, right, you can go, okay, yeah, that hurt, but I can let that go. Because it's not one of the people that, I trust and who care about me and who's giving this feedback from a position of caring about me being a better person.
Yeah. Summing up, students should utilize transition moments, maintain consistency and accountability using frameworks and not just themselves.
So that's support team, map out their support team, who are the key people and individuals that can help them.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And also something like a document or writing it down instead of just having it in their mind that they're going to do it. That's
massively.
Yeah.
Yep.
Habit stack, fix their environment, find a purpose, or at least try to find a purpose or a goal. use reflection, maintain their drive, learn on their own, and not just what you're taught or what you're forced to learn, and find a way to show your skills. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Look, I think we covered a lot today, which is great. I think there's hopefully a lot in there to provide some food for thought.
Yeah, try not to sacrifice anything and try to reach a healthier lifestyle while in school, remembering that the most important thing that someone should do is to do something you enjoy. And I feel like that's the main message of today. Enjoy whatever you do and be sustainable. Thanks, Rowan. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
No worries. Awesome to be here, Ali. No worries. Awesome to be here, Ali. No worries. Awesome to be here, Ali.